On January 24, 1961, a B-52 bomber broke apart over Goldsboro, North Carolina, and dropped 2 hydrogen bombs, each more than 250 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, onto American farmland. One of those bombs went through 5 of its 6 arming stages before a single low-voltage switch prevented a thermonuclear detonation on U.S. soil. The Pentagon told the public almost nothing, and it would take decades of Freedom of Information Act requests to expose what was really happening in the skies above us. In 1960, the Strategic Air Command launched one of the most audacious military operations of the Cold War, Operation Chrome Dome. The concept was terrifyingly simple. B-52 Stratofortress bombers, each loaded with live thermonuclear weapons, would fly continuous airborne alert routes along the borders of the Soviet Union, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The logic, rooted in nuclear deterrence theory, was that bombers already in the air could not be destroyed in a Soviet first strike. Declassified Air Force planning documents, many of them only released in the 1990s and 2000s through persistent FOIA litigation, reveal that at any given moment during the program's peak years, as many as 12 nuclear-armed bombers were airborne simultaneously, flying routes that took them directly over American and Allied cities. What those documents also reveal is something the Pentagon worked very hard to keep quiet. The program was plagued by accidents, near misses, and catastrophic failures that the military classified under a chilling code name. Within the Department of Defense, any accident involving a nuclear weapon, whether it be a drop, a fire, a jettison, or a detonation of conventional explosives surrounding a nuclear core, is designated a broken arrow incident. The term itself was classified for years, and when it finally entered public awareness, the full scope of what it represented was still heavily redacted. Declassified nuclear documents from the Atomic Energy Commission and the Defense Nuclear Agency, compiled in a 1981 summary report that was itself not fully released until the late 1990s, list at least 32 acknowledged broken arrow events between 1950 and 1980. But researchers like Eric Schlosser, whose work drew on thousands of pages of previously restricted records, have argued that the actual number is significantly higher, with many incidents downgraded or reclassified to avoid triggering the broken arrow designation and the congressional scrutiny that came with it. The pattern that emerges from these documents is unmistakable. The military knew the risks of airborne nuclear alert were staggering, and they chose to accept those risks, while systematically concealing the consequences from the American public. And nowhere is that pattern more disturbing than in what happened over North Carolina in 1961. The Goldsboro nuclear accident remains one of the most harrowing near catastrophes in human history. On that January night in 1961, a B-52G operating as part of an Operation Chrome Dome airborne alert mission experienced a catastrophic structural failure of its right wing during a routine refueling rendezvous. As the aircraft disintegrated at altitude, 2 Mark 39 thermonuclear bombs, each carrying a yield of 3.8 megatons, separated from the weapons bay. One bomb descended by parachute, its arming sequence activating as designed during freefall. The barrel switch triggered, the timer ran, the firing capacitors charged. A 2013 document, originally authored by Sandia National Laboratories engineer Parker F. Jones in 1969 and pried loose through a FOIA request by journalist Eric Schlosser, concluded in stark language that one simple dynamo technology, low-voltage switch stood between the United States and a major catastrophe. The second bomb plunged nose first into a muddy field at such velocity that its uranium and plutonium components were never fully recovered. They remain buried under the waterlogged soil of Wayne County to this day, with the Air Force having quietly purchased an easement on the land to prevent excavation. The official public statement at the time? The Air Force acknowledged that a bomber had crashed and that nuclear weapons were aboard, but assured the public there had never been any danger of a nuclear explosion. The declassified Sandia memo tells a very different story, and Goldsboro was not even the worst incident connected to Operation Chrome Dome. On January 17, 1966, a B-52G flying an Operation Chrome Dome route collided with its KC-135 refueling tanker over the coast of Palomares, Spain. The collision killed 7 of the 11 crew members aboard both aircraft. 4 B-28 thermonuclear bombs fell from the wreckage. 2 of them detonated their conventional high-explosive charges upon impact, scattering plutonium-239 across approximately 490 acres of Spanish farmland and contaminating crops, soil, and water sources. A 3rd bomb landed relatively intact near the village. The 4th disappeared into the Mediterranean Sea, triggering an 80-day search involving over 30 Navy vessels, submarines, and an experimental deep-sea submersible, a search the Pentagon initially tried to conduct without acknowledging what it was looking for. Declassified State Department cables from the period reveal frantic negotiations with the Franco government, which was simultaneously furious about the contamination and desperate to avoid the public relations catastrophe of admitting that American nuclear weapons had been routinely flying over Spanish territory without explicit permission. The Palomares nuclear accident forced a reckoning. The contaminated soil was eventually scraped up, sealed in barrels, and shipped to the Savannah River site in South Carolina. But follow-up studies by Spanish researchers in the 2000s found persistent plutonium contamination at levels the original U.S. cleanup had declared safe. The nuclear accident's cover-up surrounding Palomares extended across 2 governments and 2 continents, and the full radiological impact on the local population has never been independently assessed. But what finally killed Operation Chrome Dome wasn't Palomares. It was what happened 2 years later on the ice. On January 21, 1968, a B-52 carrying 4 thermonuclear weapons as part of Operation Chrome Dome crashed onto the sea ice near Thule Air Base in Greenland. The conventional explosives in all 4 weapons detonated on impact, rupturing the nuclear cores and spreading radioactive contamination across the ice, which subsequently melted into Baffin Bay. Danish workers, many of them indigenous Inuit people, were employed in the cleanup with minimal protective equipment. Decades later, they reported elevated rates of cancer and filed lawsuits against both the Danish and American governments. Declassified documents released by the Danish Institute for International Affairs in 1995 confirmed what had long been suspected. The Danish government had secretly agreed to allow American nuclear weapons in Greenland, despite a public policy explicitly prohibiting nuclear arms on Danish territory. The Thule disaster made it politically impossible to continue Operation Chrome Dome, and Defense Secretary Robert McNamara's successor, Clark Clifford, quietly terminated the Airborne Alert Program in 1968. But the Cold War nuclear secrets embedded in these incidents did not end with the program. The full Sandia weapon safety assessments for the bombs involved in these accidents remained classified for decades. Portions of the Atomic Energy Commission's internal accident investigation reports are redacted to this day, and the Department of Energy's own 1997 acknowledgement that there are at least 11 American nuclear weapons that were lost and never recovered, so-called empty quiver incidents, raises a question that no declassified document has yet answered. What else is still buried at the bottom of the ocean or frozen beneath the ice? The documents that have come to light tell us one thing clearly. For 8 years, the United States government flew nuclear weapons over its own citizens and its allies every single day, suffered catastrophic accidents it systematically concealed, and only stopped when the political cost of continuing became higher than the strategic benefit. The full story may never be declassified, but what we already have is damning enough. If this investigation opened your eyes, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Because we're diving into another declassified program the Pentagon swore never existed, and the documents that finally proved they were lying. Drop your questions in the comments. We read every single one.